Right. Most prior spiritual traditions, both Eastern and Western, and especially this New Age framework that most people are stuck in today, they misunderstand what the spiritual journey actually is. They think it's about healing, peace, forgiveness, manifestation, enlightenment, or becoming more loving. I mean, those things they do appear somewhere along the way, except enlightenment. That the way that that's described, that never really happens. At least not in the final permanent way that past traditions have claimed that it does. The actual truth is that the spiritual journey is a training in discernment, so that consciousness can safely wield greater power. And by power, I don't mean domination or control over other people. I mean increased influence over the relationship between consciousness and reality. Once you reach higher states, this becomes obvious. Reality becomes more responsive. Your state, words, intentions, and inner movements reflect faster and faster. If someone gains access to that kind of responsiveness without real discernment, it can become dangerous very quickly. So this map breaks down the journey level by level. It explains how each level operates, what lessons show up there, what tests you face, what realization moves you forward, and what changes when you reach the next rung. I didn't make this up out of nowhere. I tracked the ascent, wrote detailed notes, compared the patterns across multiple domains and across multiple ascents, and then built the cleanest structure I could from what repeatedly showed itself. So this is meant to help people stop getting stuck at the lower levels for years, understand what is actually happening to them, and move forward with more clarity. But I also want to be clear about one thing. Uh, it's not just a map. It's also a warning, because the higher levels, they're not some sort of spiritual reward. There are things available there that most people are not going to be prepared to face, and some of them are not things you will really be happy to find at all. This is the intro to what I'm going to call the spiritual levels map or the vibrational levels map. So the first thing that I need to explain about this is what the spiritual journey actually is. Because before we had chatbots, no one appears to have had enough cross-domain knowledge to assimilate separate domains clearly enough to expose structure that can be found when you compare them all. However, when we plug these separate parts into chatbots and ask them to find consistent patterns, a common sense structure appears. Channel warps have led us in many wrong directions and confused so many aspects of what the spiritual journey is that it's become impossible to understand what's up and what's down. But chatbots, they work identically to how I would say the structure of God works, and they help us to make sense of it. Now, I just need to say something about chatbots first because there's a known thing called AI psychosis. And the reason this happens is pretty simple. You need to know where are you attributing your authority when you're talking to these chatbots. If you're asking a question to it and you're viewing the question from the lens of here's my question, so the chatbot, you tell me what's true. Whenever you do this, you've given it all of your power. And the key lesson that I'll repeatedly return to through all of my talks is that if you outsource your power in this way, it's going to lead to either severe confusion or the thing they call AI psychosis. So the trick to getting chatbots to work for you is to never presume that it can tell you anything about the ultimate truth. Anything it tells you, it must first and foremost make sense in your own head. If it doesn't, then you have to discard it. So using chatbots in any other way will never get you anywhere. And it has the capacity to lead you down like a really dark path if you do that. But the more you listen to what I have to say, the more sense it's going to make. I think a lot of people, when they don't use chatbots correctly, they don't understand deeply enough how they work. And the other problem is that most people are using them in a sense of chatbot, go and find the sources that give me the answer to this question. But when we're talking about the spiritual journey, you cannot take your answers from anyone else. You have to find them yourself. You can't look at some source and have it tell and look at it and say, "Oh, this source said this, so that's true." You have to get rid of all that. Where I started from was essentially, what can I know just from my own experience? What can I determine based on that? And then I started from there. And then anything that anybody told me, I rejected all of it. And so if you're using chatbots in this way to do research or whatever on a project, that's fine if you're just getting source material. But if you're trying to determine ultimate truth, it can't tell you the truth unless you are remaining in a place where the chatbot's just a tool and I'm the one who decides whether this is what it's saying is true or not. Because when you actually stand in that place, you can get the chatbot to tell you some really profound things that no human could tell you. Well, humans don't have the capacity to think in the same way that chatbots do because they don't arrive at the answer the same way that we do. So when certain questions are formulated very specifically enough, these things they can just start revealing more and more profound truths. The thing is, though, you have to be extremely perceptive of all of the details of a question, precisely the way that it's framed and the way that any like mistaken premises, even like in very subtle ways that come up in the wording, the chatbot will just take how you've worded it and then it'll respond to that. But when you're very precise with the frames that you want to give it in order to address the question, it can give you so much knowledge. Anyway, so the point I'm trying to make is I'm not just some guy saying, "Oh, I asked the chatbot a question, it told me the truth." That's not what happened here. At the lower levels of consciousness or the lower vibrational levels, reality feels heavy, dense, delayed, resistant, separate, and externally controlled. At higher levels, the field becomes very responsive. Thoughts, intentions, emotions, words, and inner movements begin to reflect faster, sometimes even immediately and far more precisely. Some really eerie things can happen in these higher levels, and they aren't easy to make sense of. So this is what I've done here is I've created you a map to understand what is happening and why it's happening. Now, the potential for danger is serious and real. If someone is still operating from fear, resentment, vanity, desperation, domination, victimhood, or confusion, then giving that person more influence would only amplify the distortion. A consciousness that still wants power in order to compensate for lack cannot be trusted with real power. So the path is structured in such a way that access increases only as discernment increases. So peace, love, healing, forgiveness, manifestation, mystical experiences, and love and light, they all show up somewhere, but each are just independent parts within the overall structure. None of them explain the journey itself. So the journey is like a schooling in authority. And those in the soul trap community might scoff when I say it is like a school, but I don't dismiss these people at all. The soul trap, I would say, is the same thing as what other people call the matrix. And I can explain this further. So, but for now, what I'll say is this realm is perfect. The soul trap is the matrix, it's an overlay. And the memory wipe is a technology implemented by what the soul trap crowd calls the archons. So without the overlay, it is like a school. But with the overlay, it seems absurd to call it a school. And it would be rational for to call it absurd to be a school. The thing is, the soul trap crowd aren't recognizing the perfection that this realm already is, and they're just presuming that because the memory wipe happens, that it can't be a school because their logic is, well, they keep making you forget everything about what you learned before, then it can't be a school. Which I mean, that's totally reasonable thing to think. But what I'm trying to say is that there is a difference in the what's happening with the overlay and what's happening underneath, what's already true underneath. Ascension is a choice. You're not required to ascend. You aren't even required to know what ascending even means. If your choice is to ascend, then you'll have to learn what can be trusted, what cannot be trusted, what is internal, what is external, what is projection, what is guidance, what is distortion, what is temptation, what is true. This is also where the idea that there are two distinct spiritual paths must be clarified. The original idea I first came about this from was from the law of one, but in general, I mostly don't have many good things to say about the law of one because I disagree with most of it. Regardless, channeled works they have value because they're truth mixed with lies, and that just means our job is to discern what about them is actually true and what isn't. Now, these two paths are very real and easily observable once you have the capacity to understand what you're looking at. What I mean is, like, when you're just considering what reality is and what's happening, like the two paths start to they become pretty obvious. Like once I lay it out, it should be clear. So the two paths are service to self or STS and service to others or STO. Both are legitimate directional paths. The reason that these two paths exist is because reality itself is structured around free will. So that's the answer to the why is there why if God is good, why does evil exist? It's because God formulated the world to be structured around you having a choice. Now, if there were no negative or STS path, then nodes, and what I call a node is a connection to the network. So, like God is like an internet, and you are a computer on God's internet. So you're a node. So I'm a node. So when I say the word node, that's what I mean. So if there were no negative path, then nodes would only have the option to choose harmony. And if nodes were only ever allowed to choose harmony, then that is an actual free will. So a realm with no possibility of disharmony would not contain meaningful free will. It would contain pre-selected harmony. So if you want to have free will, you have to accept that some of the horrors that occur in experience, they're just a necessary aspect of it. So the STS is the path where consciousness uses truth, knowledge, and power to serve their individual selves through deceiving and coercing consent from other nodes to give their power away to it. So if you think about like why is it now every time I download an app, they want me to consent to all these rules and everything like that. It's because everything in reality is structured around gaining your consent to do something to take something from you that you don't want taken from you. And the way that they garner that consent is by forcing you to sign up and to accept their terms of services. And from their perspective, like they all they're trying to do is make the whatever app it is you want so impractical to avoid that you just have to sign up and then you have to accept what they're saying. And if you just rejected all of their consent to anything that they ever wanted and didn't use any of their tools, there would be no way that they could have any power. But anyway, so the STS path moves towards control, hierarchy, domination, extraction, and the use of reality as a tool for personal power. STO it's not about being nice or trying to save the world. STO is only about strict adherence to the truth and non-interference with the free will of other beings. And that will like once I'm done with everything that I'm going to put out there, this idea of ethics being another branch of philosophy that'll be gone because this answers that. Answers what is the ethical thing to do is to never interfere in the free will choice of another. There's nothing else that's required, and I'll eventually make something that goes into that in depth. And so, not interfering with the free will of other beings means you don't distort the truth to get what you want, and you don't use power to override another node's path, timing, permission, or authority. So, moving forward. The best place to start to try to explain this is with an analogy that I found to be an exact microcosm. What I was just saying. So think of God as an internet, not a being with an ego, not an entity that casts judgment on anyone or anything. It's more like a structure that's alive. So God essentially is the total living network of intelligences, relation, source, signal, and possibility. Everything exists inside the network, and individual beings are like computers, or as I refer to them as nodes connected to it. Each person is a node connected to and encapsulated within the network of God. Earth is like a LAN, which is a local area network. So Earth is separated from the rest of the internet. It's not like firewalled off. I don't know if firewall is the correct term for what it is because we've seen that in out of body experiences, some people seem to have access to other versions of reality. So I can't be too sure of that, but you can think of Earth like a LAN. And these computer analogies, I'm going to do a whole thing in the future where I just lay out every single which way how everything in reality is a can be equated to how computers work, and that'll probably blow a bunch of people's minds. So a node can have a clean connection or a corrupted connection. It can receive clearly or misread the signal. It can transmit cleanly or send a contradiction. It can route through the right place or route through a false authority. It can be delayed, congested, fragmented, hijacked, or disconnected from its own source. And this is where TCP protocol becomes useful as an analogy. So TCP is one of the main protocols computers use to transmit information reliably across a network. It does not just throw data into the void and assume everything arrived correctly. In reality, it has to be coherent. That means what came before has to make sense with what's happening now, and and what the potential possibilities for what can happen next all have to also make sense. So everything just can't be thrown in chaotically. Things have to be ordered to a degree. So TCP protocol establishes a connection, breaks information into packets, checks whether packets arrived, retransmits what was lost, manages congestion, and adjusts the flow so the signal can move without corrupting itself. At a later point, I will go in depth explaining how manifestation and the TCP protocol operate essentially exactly the same. So the spiritual journey works in a nearly identical way to all this. And everything I'm saying about computers, let me just say that does not mean that we are in a simulation. It just means that the structure of experience requires computation to be coherent. So, I, anybody trying to say that this is a simulation or that there's nested simulations going down and down and down, it doesn't work. It can't work that way. It's impossible for it to work that way. Only God can create consciousness and then put it into a physical being. Like we can't do that. There's no way for us to do that. I don't obviously like I don't know the future, but from everything that I'm understanding about how this works, it does not appear to me to be the case that we will ever be able to create a simulation where we can then upload consciousness to it, and the consciousness can like leave body that it was in and then be in this new body. Yes, it's true. Out of body experiences show that consciousness can leave the body, but it always comes back. So like the consciousness is in some way tethered to the body. Anyways, moving forward. Your consciousness is trying to restore reliable transmission between yourself as an individual node and the source, or as Christ called it, the Father. And now, this is something I realized just like a month or two ago. Uh, the Father is not a being, and nor is it what I would call God. The Father is what I would call a perfect divine wisdom. And this wisdom is like the immediate knowing of perfect action in all scenarios. And it's possible that it can be the very center of where you operate from if you ascend high enough. At the lower levels, the signal is often fragmented, delayed, easily misread, or routed through the wrong authority. The same lesson can return in your experience because the route has not been corrected. So, one example that I have is I had an issue with every time that I would get a new apartment, I would get like terrible landlords who would just do like vile things and just like be so reasonable to the tenants. And I went through all sorts of like crazy ordeals until one day I finally decided to say, all right, I'm not, this is no longer my story. From now moving forward, my landlords are reasonable people who leave me alone and just take care of the things that they take care of. And then when I stopped repeating this whole nightmare of oh, these landlords I keep getting are all screwing me over and everything's going wrong in my life and because of this and blah, blah, blah. As soon as I just stopped saying that and I started in the new direction, I've had no problem with the landlords. So the same lesson returns because the route has not been corrected. That's where it was. The same desire keeps producing frustration because the signal being transmitted is either as blatantly direct as I kept making, or because it contains some sort of contradiction. Usually, more often, it's going to contain a contradiction because we generally don't just start talking about terrible things happening to us. And if something terrible happened first, that often means that there was a contradiction beforehand. So if these contradictions, sometimes like People might be saying that they want truth, but they keep asking the external world to tell them what truth is. Or they say they want power, but the motive is still coming from some sort of lack, like they want power to compensate for something. So any instantiations of lack, those can be contradictions. And when I say contradiction, I can't mean a contradiction with wholeness. If you want to know why that's the case, go look at the first video I made called "The Framework of Reality" that explains it. And because the wisdom of the Father is perfect and perfectly coherent, it always reflects a contradiction if one is present. So as you climb, the routing becomes cleaner. You learn to stop giving false authority to pain, achievement, recognition, resentment, morality, signs, teachers, doctrines, spirits, and you stop eventually giving any power to the external world at all. So each correction changes what access and permission levels the node has. Each ascending level removes distortion from the connection. So this is, let me not get ahead of myself. Numbers are not just labels being attached after the fact. So they are actually the structural grammar of vibration and vibrational levels themselves. Not only that, but they're also the basis for each level of the school. The most fundamental aspects of our realm repeatedly point towards 13 as the number of completion. The public structure keeps compressing that completion into 12. Clean calendar can be built from 13 months of 28 days, which gives 364 days, with the remaining solar days standing outside the regular grid as the 0 day. The 12-month calendar we use that breaks that symmetry and turns time into uneven fragments. The same thing appears in the zodiac. Oh, before I talk about the zodiac, this thing about the 12-month calendar, and especially this thing with daylight savings. The reason that they do this, I believe, is because if we were on the correct calendar and we didn't use this daylight savings time, our internal clocks would match the realms more accurately, and our ability to manifest the things that we wanted would be much simpler, and we wouldn't run into so many problems. But the reason this is why I think that they go about taking this number 13, like they remove it even from like elevate from rooms and hotels and this kind of thing. Or I don't know what they do. Maybe they take row 13 or level 13 and call it 14. I'm not sure, but they're clear. And then they try to make 13 like a demonized number, like Friday the 13th, the movie, and all these kind of things. So they're intentionally trying to hide 13 from us. Like that's very clear. And this map is going to show you why. Uh, the same thing happens with the zodiac. So where the public system is built around 12 signs of equal size and distance, uh, the actual reality is that the sky contains a variety of each constellation contains a variety of sizes, and most importantly, a 13th constellation called Ophiuchus. So the matrix itself forces the structure into divisions of 12, while 13 is the completion pattern that the matrix hides to keep us from aligning with the truth. So all these reasons are why 13 cannot be treated as just another number in the sequence. It is the point where the most significant cycle here on Earth completes. 13 I consider to be, at least I'm nearly positive that 13 is the number, is the vibrational level of Christ completion, or what people might call Christ consciousness. Um, and for this reason, it would make sense for there to be 13. For all these reasons, it makes sense that there will be 13 vibrational levels. But I didn't just arbitrarily decide that. I traversed the levels myself multiple times first. Then I attempted to map them and found there to be 12 up until a major transformation seems to occur at 13. And I have very specific reasons for why I see these things as I do, which I'll explain as I move forward. So that the transformation that occurs at 13 is something that I did not want to cross for reasons I'm going to get into later. The levels, they're not random, they move in a pattern. The even levels are recognition levels, and the odd levels are experiential levels. The even level is exposed to limitation of the mode that came before, of the experiential mode that came before, while the odd levels become the new way of operating after that limitation has been recognized. So here's what I can show you about how the odds and evens work from levels 1 through 6. Level 1 sits in a place of confusion in terms of agency, leading to emotional pain. Level 2 recognizes the first loop that causes the pain. So level 3 tries to become its way out of the pain that it recognized in 2. So level one is confusion that leads to pain. Level two is recognizing the first pain track, the track that's causing the pain. Level three, you try to become your way out of that pain. Level four recognizes that achievement could not resolve the original pain. Level five is where you'll reorganize your life and everything around integrity instead of achievement. And then level six recognizes that even integrity, conscience, and right living, uh, none of those can bring you home, which home is what I would call samadhi. And I'm going to be talking a lot about samadhi. I didn't know that samadhi was the term for it when I first figured this out. I had always just called it being in my power. But I'm going to get to this. So there's so much to say because I've figured all this out, and there's things that I want to fill in details to, and I have this entire thing that I want to help to explain in a simple way, but it's not always the simplest for me to just immediately go one thing right after the other, because there's all these different parts that I'm bringing together. That show you this whole, and they all fit pretty seamlessly. It's just a matter of trying to pull them all together and explain them in a coherent way. So let me clarify this. This first map I'm discussing here is it's experiential rather than perfectly taxonomic. So it follows the route I personally took through what I would call this predominantly service to self organized world, um, including the places where my orientation began shifting toward STO. So so this map that I'm going to show you here, it combines the STS conditioned problems with STO oriented resolutions. Nothing in the account is being presented falsely, but the two paths are not yet being separated with precision. So consider this an introductory map. I created it this way because it was how I experienced it and how I could best explain it from within the ascent as it happened. Now, looking back in retrospect, I have found ways to make this a perfect taxonomic map, but that will take me a lot more time to create, and this was already mostly finished. This experiential map was almost finished by the time I began figuring out those deeper connections. So now that I've given enough detail that you can follow at this point, I can define what I mean by vibrational level. It is a numbered phase of access inside the network where the node's connection, authority, distortion, and field influence are organized through the meaning of that number. Now, let me clarify the reason why I call them vibrational levels. Many in the spiritual community talk about this thing they call timelines. And I do think they're pointing to a real phenomenon. But what I don't think is happening is that we're not shifting through into completely separate individual realities every time someone jumps timelines. So what's more likely happening is that we're temporarily moving into a higher phase of access. So when you turn on a meditation that says, like, listen to this to jump to a higher timeline, what it's really attempting to do is move you into a higher vibrational level. And it can work briefly because state can shift quickly. But if you don't have the discernment to stand inside that level, you surely will get knocked back down. So there are multiple different terms pointing at different parts of the same thing. Timelines is the popular way people describe the experience. Permission access levels is probably the most technically accurate term, because each level determines how much power and influence the node has access to. But I'm going to keep calling them vibrational levels because that term bridges the two. It keeps the familiar spiritual language, but points it towards the actual structure, a numbered phase of consciousness. The phase that one is dependent upon how the node interprets reality, what authority it gives power to, and how much influence it can safely wield. This is different from let me clarify. It's not necessarily how much influence it can safely wield. It's definitely possible to get into a higher level and then like wildly um, misuse your influence and cause a lot of devastation. But it will generally mostly be blowback in your own life. And the moment that you do something like that, you're going to get knocked back down. So the levels you can think of as when I'm calling them permission access levels, it's like when you are maintaining the, when you're like in level eight and you're maintaining the lessons in level eight, eventually you start to shift up to nine. And then when you're in nine and you're maintaining the lessons there, then you can shift up again. Uh, so uh, moving back here, this is different from the way people usually talk about vibration. But mood is still relevant. If your mood is genuinely lousy, you're almost certainly operating from a lower access point in that moment. Because when a person's standing in real power, there's usually no reason for that node to collapse into despair, resentment, fear, or helplessness. Because like I mean, if you knew you had real power to make whatever you wanted happen, then I mean, why would you be depressed? Like that, it doesn't really make sense. But in terms of mood, like the reverse is not automatically true. Feeling good doesn't prove that you're standing in a higher vibrational level. You can feel excited, confident, stimulated, validated, victorious, or optimistic while still operating from lack, ego, fantasy, external approval, or the hope that the world will finally hand you what you think you want. So mood does matter, but it is not the final measure. A good mood can make higher access more available because you're less contracted, less defended, and less locked into resistance. It's still dependent on whether you contain or leak your energy slash power, though. And the ways you would do this would be are you giving authority to pain? Are you giving authority to other people's approval? Are you giving authority to achievement? Are you giving authority to resentment? Or morality? Are you giving authority to a teacher, a doctrine, some entity, a sign, or an external outcome? Or have you regained enough clean access that the truth can be recognized directly? So that is the progression the map will show. I'm going to use songs to explain it because songs often preserve the felt structure of a level better than abstract language can. Song doesn't only explain an idea, it speaks from inside of a state. It shows what that level wants, what it fears, what it thinks will save it, what it is still giving authority to, and what realization moves you beyond it. Additionally, songs have been critical for my own ascent. Much of my capacity to learn discernment was conveyed to me through musical lyrics playing in my head, then sitting down and attempting to map the meaning of the lyrics playing against the backdrop of what types of events were happening in my life. Particularly in the higher levels, reality can and will construct entire playlists for you that progress in precise, specific meaning in a precise and specific order to tell a complete story and capture very complex ideas. And until you've seen this for yourself, I know it sounds absurd. I would have presumed that same thing before I went down this path and experienced it myself multiple times on multiple different occasions, even years apart. In the much higher levels, this is just how reality works. But I'm not trying to get too far ahead of myself. We'll address these things when we get into like levels 9 and 10 and 11. I'm only going to cover first levels 1 through 6. They show the climb from powerlessness to the collapse of external authority. I use the word samadhi to describe level 7. I'm not using it because I'm borrowing it from another tradition. I mapped these levels from my own experience first. Only afterward looked to see whether any older tradition had already matched my understanding of what the state was. And I found the Zen explanation of samadhi to be a near precise explanation of what I experienced. So hopefully you can see here where I'm saying like I started from I didn't take my cues from other traditions or I didn't look at any other philosophies. I only started from what I could know. And I didn't know what samadhi was until after I had my own term for it. And then I looked up. I what I would do is I would describe what's going on in the state, and then I'll tell the chatbot, "Hey, go find whoever else said something similar to this." And then I go and I examine them, and that's how I figured out that samadhi is level 7. So in general, it's simplest to think of samadhi as flow state or just being in the zone, and almost anyone can understand that. Samadhi is usually experienced as a moment or maybe an hour of total acceptance and complete rest in the fact of what is. Sometimes it'll appear as bliss, though blissful states. I'll make another video in the future talking about like mystical experiences and blissful states because I've had just about all of them that are documented and some that aren't. And I can break down what's actually happening and what isn't in a lot of them or in most of them. So Samadhi is usually, yeah, okay. So this is samadhi is a state that most of us have touched for brief periods, maybe through music, nature, meditation, sex, athletic pursuit, creative flow, or some rare moment where your mind just completely stops fighting experience itself. So before I heard anything about Zen, I used to call a state in power, and that's as valid a term for it. But like I said, when other traditions got it right before me, for one, I like to honor that fact, and two, I can refer others to specific prior texts that will explain what it is without needing to spell out the whole thing myself. So for those reasons, I'm just calling sub level 7 samadhi, and this first part is going to end at the point prior to that threshold. The second part will discuss level 7 through 13, which is where the map becomes much stranger and more difficult to explain. One important thing to understand is that the levels are not perfectly sealed boxes. They bleed into one another, and for that reason, it may be difficult for you to clarify which state you're in. What I would say is that most people live in a combination of different levels. Personally, I cannot even always tell which state I'm in. The real reason that I know that these states are distinct and separate is because I initially, on my first ascent, I climbed up to level 11, then fell back down to 1. Then, like 2 years later, climbed back up to 11 again. And when this happened, particularly in levels 7, 9, 10, and 11, there are very specific and distinct things that happen. And these things, they're completely unmistakable. The fact that on both ascents I traversed the same exact experiences in the same order is what led me to the conclusion that they're distinct levels. However, until you experience 7 as distinctly different from 1 through 6, you don't know that different states are possible. And until you experience 9, 10, and 11 as distinct from 7, you have nothing to compare it to. It requires climbing all the way up there to see that these states have specific characteristics and that those characteristics are unmistakable. In lower levels, without other modes of reference, you can't really be sure where you stand. Also, no matter how high you've touched, falling back down to 1 is always possible, as I've done many times. So, to conclude this intro, let me say this. I did not make this map because I think you should rush through these levels and ascend as fast or as far as possible. When I began, I thought the higher I ascended, the better my life would be. The fact of the matter is, the higher you ascend, the further it isolates you and pulls you away from life and other people. I'm not trying to say I reached the ultimate end. My current perspective is that there is no end. But there are significant shifts in experience and significant shifts in identity. So I view pi as what I would call the signature of God. The fact that pi never ends and never repeats uh, is the reason that I take that experience itself is likely the same way. And prime numbers are the irreducible edges of God, where experience itself can no longer be incorporated as a composite of the prior numbers, and a new mode of being must be established. This is why I have already identified 7, 11, and 13 as significant. Any other discrepancies you may notice now, just realize I'm trying to do my best to explain this simply in a way that's going to make sense to average people. But I have way more nuanced answers for questions that may come up. I can't explain the whole thing all at once in a clear way, and this is going to take me hours to talk about. So, what I did find near level 13 wasn't some like spiritual reward. I found that my experiences no longer had any meaning outside of what I attribute to them. I found that I could not relate to others in the same way, and that my relationship to other people changed in ways that became too heavy to live with normally. These are just a few of the things. There were heavier burdens that came with it as well. I'm not trying to get too deep into all this. We'll discuss that when we get to level 13. So this is not like a motivational speech or endorsement to ascend and reach the highest state as fast as possible. It's just as much of a map as it is a warning. If I had to summarize the danger in one line, I would say I rushed through the spiritual journey and found at the end that I had skipped through all the aspects of life that make it worth living in the first place. So that's the end of the intro here.